Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Star Coast Protection Network at s2pn.com. Today we're on day 240, and we're talking about Dignitatis Humanae 15, which is just a conclusion to the document. So if you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican and frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about how we need to pray for the gospel to reach all nations and proclaim the truth of the gospel, both individually and as the church. Today, we're talking about there exists a lot of religious freedom today, the church just acknowledging the fact, but we are exhorted to practice it better and pursue peace that comes from this practice. So, paragraph 15 has 3 subparagraphs. B is over half of the text, much larger than A and C. A talks about the current politics, just acknowledging what exists in the world at the time in the 1960s, and I think would generally apply still today in the 2020s. B is the church acknowledges this reality and exhorts us to practice religious liberty. And then C is just a final exhortation, almost like a blessing, a conclusion, however you want to say that. Anyways, let's read 15a. The fact is that men of the present day want to be able freely to profess their religion in private and in public. Indeed, religious freedom has already been declared to be a civil right in most constitutions, and it is solemnly recognized in international documents. The further fact is that forms of government still exist under which, even though freedom of religious worship receives constitutional recognition, the powers of government are engaged in the effort to deter citizens from the profession of religion and to make life very difficult and dangerous for religious communities. This is simply a statement of fact about the world. The 1800s, 1900s, this was acknowledged in most countries. Most countries acknowledge some kind of religious freedom. It's not always practiced, especially the communist or totalitarian governments tend to want to get that right. The Nazis didn't practice this religious freedom, even though they had it technically in the Constitution and things. And so that's the challenge. And it wants what the documents say, hey, we're going to call these countries back to it. And it's also recognized internationally. In the modern world. This is by far not the standard historically, because if you look at historically, most nations were mono-religious, just one religion, and often it was even where the king was a priest king, he was also the high priest, where there was a very strong altar, what is sometimes called altar and throne or altar and crown alliance, where yes, they were separate, but they were very closely aligned. And oftentimes, unfortunately, the altar got pushed under the throne or the crown a lot of times, and it was really the king directing the religion. So this is something the king or emperor, whoever it was, directing it. This is something new in the world with Christianity, and I think Christianity is really one of the first ones to bring this about in a way that recognizes that there is a true religion, but we have religious liberty, because some of the secularists said, hey, religion is all just nonsense, so we're just going to have religious liberty for indifference, and that was wrong. And then a lot of the other religions are like, oh no, we don't have religious freedom because we have this religion is the right one. And we have this unique linking of the middle ground. So let's move on to B. The church acknowledges the reality and exhorts all to practice religious liberty. So here we go. 15b. This council agrees with joy the first of these 2 facts as among the signs of the times. With sorrow, however, it denounces the other fact only to be deplored. This council exhorts Catholics, and it directs a plea to all men most carefully to consider how greatly necessary religious freedom is, especially in the present condition of the human family. All nations are coming into even closer unity. Men of different cultures and religions are being brought together in closer relationships. There is a growing consensus of the personal responsibility that every man has. This is all evident. Consequently, in order that relationships of peace and harmony be established and maintained within the whole of mankind, it is necessary that religious freedom be everywhere provided with an effective constitutional guarantee, and that respect be shown for the high duty and right of man to freely lead his religious life in society. So the first 2 sentences here just acknowledge what we talked about in paragraph A. It's not good. It's good that religious liberty is recognized in all laws. It's not good that it's not always practiced. And then it pleads for all to practice religious liberty. one of the things that also have in the modern world is with all this migration, there is a lot more religious intermingling, not necessarily of like New Age time, but where our neighbors, very high chance, are not the same religion as us, where that was outside of the Roman Empire, and that time there was some of that then, but in many other cultures, that's really odd and really strange that, like, I grew up and my next door neighbors were Sikhs. And most of the people in my neighborhood were were Protestants, I think, of varying types, varying degrees of seriousness and things like that. I went to a Boy Scout troop and I was one of the few Catholics when I was younger, right? And those are the reality. And that's different from a lot of other places where you'd be in Ireland and in your town where everyone was Catholic. Or in England, everyone was Anglican. Or in Germany, everyone was Lutheran in your town. And things like that were the standard. And now, when we have this all intermingling of people of different religions, that greater respect needs to be shown. And this is also important for international agreements, because we are making agreements of peace with countries who have different gods, who the majority of people in those countries have different gods, right? The majority of Americans still identify as Christian, like 75% of Americans identify as being Christian of some form. But if we make a peace treaty with another country where they don't identify Jesus as the Messiah, we need to have some kind of idea of religious liberty in that, so that we're not forcing each other to convert or anything like that. And this helps a lot with peace, even internal to a country, because where each person is able to practice their own religion, and that allows for a peaceful coexistence in society. And we have to make sure this doesn't become this indifferentism, the secular version that's very problematic, kind of the coexist bumper sticker that kind of treats it as just different flavors and things like that. And this is important. And each man has a personal responsibility here. They have a personal responsibility in how they are going to live this out. So moving on to paragraph 15c, this is pretty straightforward. It's just a final exhortation. May the God and Father of all grant that the human family, through careful observance of the principles of religious freedom in society, may be brought by the grace of Christ and the power of the Holy Spirit to the sublime and unending glorious freedom of the sons of God. Romans 8. This is exhorting us to practice this. This is the work of unity with non-Christians. Obviously, we can't have unity of belief. And it's not ecumenism, but to have a peaceful coexistence with them and to trust the truth of the conscience, the truth of reality, the truth of Jesus to move them over. So hopefully this whole document has been very helpful. This document is in many ways one of the more difficult, if not the most difficult one to go over, just because it is so dense and it is still somewhat controversial, because some of the prior church teachings were condemning the other vision of religious liberty, whereas this one's promoting it. And so it's important to understand this document, especially if you are of a more trad tendency, because this is, especially in the kind of trad circles of Catholicism, this can be a little bit of a challenge to talk about. And so hopefully this summary helped you out, this analysis we've done over these days. And hopefully you can now explain religious liberty in a way that keeps the truth of the faith and keeps the truth of each one following their conscience and the truth of trying to convince people, not coerce them. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year and the whole series on this document. I do this podcast on a volunteer basis, and my local religious community relies on donations to pay our bills. If you want to support my community, you can go to patreon.com/frmatthewlc. There's also a link for that and a one-time donation on my own website, frmatthewlc.com. You can also donate to help StarQuest at sqpn.com/give. Tomorrow we're going to start Ad Gentes, the document on missionary activity, with an interview. I have scheduled the interview, but I haven't done it, so in case something doesn't work out, I'm not going to tell you who it is. Please share your stand to learn more about Vatican II, which would be a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, like playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.